It's funny to think that for a long time, and maybe it's still true, that companies were just designed to make money. Any aliens looking down on us would just be like smacking their forehead. They've invented this notion called money, and they're all after it. And in the meantime, they're not going to have any place to live. And nobody's happy, and they hate working. Where we find success is making sure that the work that we do is holding that performance and the humanity in equal measure, and that they're feeding each other. It should be a positive feedback loop where one doesn't have to come at the expense of the other. I think we're just relearning that as a society now.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Bree Groff is fighting for a future in which humanity and business performance are valued equally. As social problems like inequality, resource management, and climate action come to a head, leaders are being called on to take the courageous step of designing work that serves stakeholders and humanity alike. In this episode, Bree and I discuss the challenges leaders are facing, the shifting norms of work, and how we can better design work for humans. Bree Groff is a partner at SYPartners, a transformation design company that helps great leaders build great companies. Her work focuses on transformation, innovation, organizational design, and culture. And she's worked with companies like Calvin Klein, Target, Microsoft, and Google. Bree is also a keynote speaker and was previously the CEO of the global change company, the NOBL Collective. In today's episode, we discuss the internal work required of today's leaders, how to build a humanity-centric organization, the root causes of bad work, how Shopify has eliminated most company meetings, authenticity at work, Bree's lessons from consulting with numerous startups, how expectations for leaders are becoming more and more complex, and other topics. Okay, as always, if you're enjoying Work for Humans, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And now I bring you Bree Groff. Bree Groff, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thank you, Dart. I'm happy to be here with you.
I think of SYPartners as IDEO, but not for products. I think of it as a high-end design house for something other than products. And I know that SYPartners partners with IDEO. And so if you're not designing products, what's the material that you work in?
Good question. At the highest level, it's hearts and minds. We make people feel inspired, connected to a vision, engaged at work, committed to a particular vision or strategy for a company. You could sort of separate our work into two phases. There's the envisioning phase that we do with leaders, founders, CEOs, C-suite, to help them imagine what they want the next chapter of their organization to be. So in there, we're making confidence, inspiration, and quite literally what that looks like is providing all of the fodder, the experiences, an offsite, a group leadership experience where those leaders are inventing the future that they want. They're imagining it. It's coming from within, as opposed to us making a strategy document, giving it to them, and them deducing the future. So what we're creating is really the context for them to be able to have the space and time and confidence to figure out what that next thing is. And then once they do, a lot of times our work comes out in the form of a purpose or a vision or a strategy or an employee value proposition or some sort of intentional forward-looking commitment. And then our work is engaging the organization towards that vision. So that's everything from learning to inspiration to connection to camaraderie in that future. So what's different at the end of our work is the humans, and the humans then go about making the different future for the company. That's at my most esoteric, philosophical example of what we do.
No, it makes a ton of sense. I think we're actually going to talk through each of these pieces because I'm going to say that the first material you work in is future, which is we're going to design a future, and then we're going to describe that future and then engage people in that future. And I know that there's probably a lot more vertically besides that, but that's a super interesting path, especially I mean, there's been a lot of talk lately about how important purpose is in work. And it is super important, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's often spoken of without actually knowing what we mean by it.
Yeah.
And so I think we'll want to get into that. What is the kind of challenge that leaders have that they come to SYPartners?
Well, a lot of times, again, at the highest level, it's sort of an existential what's next. So we work at the moment of CEO transitions quite a bit. So the leader coming in, what's my next agenda? Where am I going to take us in the future? What does that horizon hold? So a lot of those moments of transition, sometimes it's sort of a return to great moment where a company has sort of lost their way, lost their soul for whatever reason, market or leadership change, and they're looking to sort of reignite that original spirit of the company. And so sometimes we're helping them find that source code DNA and bring that to life again. Sometimes it's just much more practical. Sometimes it's our engagement scores are down across the organization. We need to figure out why, what we're going to do about it. The talent market, it ebbs and flows, but your top talent is always up for grabs. And so it's the project either around defining a new culture or an employee value proposition, or sometimes as tactical as an onboarding programs, especially in times of great expansion, lots of M&A activity. Like, how are we bringing people together? So it runs the gamut. We're actually doing a ton more climate action work because leaders it's an unknown territory. Like, what are we supposed to commit to? How do we think about it? And so, not that we are climate experts ourselves, we are experts in holding the space for leaders to have these conversations and envision that future of what they want their climate action plan to be. So the content of the work sometimes evolves over time, but there's a consistent thread of, I need to better see this new future, and I need to figure out what we're going to do about it, and I need to figure out how we're going to engage our people in getting there.
A lot of the material I read in doing the background for this spoke about the courage of leaders. Why is that an important ingredient?
Oh, because leadership's just boring if you're not courageous. And so are companies, honestly. We're very lucky as an organization that we get to be a little picky, I suppose, about the leaders that we work with. Or rather, we attract leaders who are ready to explore and push boundaries in very big ways. And so that is great fun for us. So a leader that, wants to figure out if a new market is suitable and what the, market opportunity, there's tons of strategic consultancies you can go to sort of get that data and make a yes or no decision. But the leaders that we work with that tend to come to us are the ones who have so much courage to anything, to break into a market, to redefine how their organization works, to upend a strategy or a vision that they've held before, to change their relationship with their employees. Because they're up for it doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to get there with their leadership team or what that should be like. And so that's why they come to us. It's just nutty walking around SYP offices. Sometimes you'll look in a conference room and Oprah's on the screen because we're working with her, and WW. It's super cool. Or Howard Schultz sometimes is walking around the office. And so we're very lucky. We get the bold ones.
Is it usually CEOs?
Lots of times, not exclusively. Sometimes it's C-suite, but almost always there's a senior leader that's driving the change. More often these days, it's CHROs with sort of the rise of focus on employees, what they need, culture. So it's really skyrocketed the number of engagements we've done with the CHRO as our main client.
SYPartners deploys an enormous amount of what I would call poetry and art. Its own branding, but also in the, I'm going to say product or the work product that it makes. Why? And I'll give you some context on that, which is that I interviewed Jim Carrick-Burtwell. Jim Carrick-Burtwell runs a big conference in London. And in it, he brings in people from the humanities for business people and attracts business people to listen to a vicar, bishop from a large church, and the head of the Royal Theatre of London, and all these different, very diverse, a barrister, a politician. Mm-hmm. And I asked him, what is the hunger that exists in the leadership population that is satisfied by the humanities. And so I see that very much in SYPartners. I want to ask you why that. What is it about that that brings something to the table that is different from other things?
I think it's because maybe if you were going to be categorical about it, there's two ways to get answers about what you should do with your company. One is to hire a consulting firm to go out and do a market analysis, go out and figure out consumer preferences. You go out into the world to try and find answers and come back. That's not our method. Sometimes we do a little like, okay, what are the forces at play? What's happening in the industry? Certainly. But our primary vehicle for change and vision is helping leaders look inside themselves for what they know at an instinctual level, at a creative prowess level of what they want for the future, what they can imagine. And so, whereas a market analysis is a tool for that external research, poetry and art and things that move you and help you see in new ways and find new perspectives, those are tools for helping people look inside themselves for those answers, to summon the bravery to try something new, to see their industry in a new way, to see their company in a new way, to reconnect with why they love the work, the company, the people in the first place. And so because a lot of our work lives at that very highest purpose and vision level, a lot of it is sort of like organizational soul searching. We're helping people find their roots again. And so we need the tools that sort of summon that internal fire, the internal imagination. And so because of that, it is very tactile, the materials we use, or we'll take leaders on seeing tours or write a manifesto, or especially during the pandemic when people couldn't get together, we'd start an offsite with one of my colleagues, a partner at SYP, who's an amazing pianist. And so she would just start with a little concert to get people a bit relaxed and inspired. And also it's just more fun too. Like, one would hope that the leaders of a company, when they are doing this kind of work, are at their most inspired, because that's their job. If they're going to be setting the direction for the ship, they should be in that place. And not to say that you don't later do the finances behind it. Okay, what bold moves are we going to make? But really that initial vision needs to come from somewhere very human.
Reminds me of a couple of things. First of all, it reminds me of William Faulkner's Nobel Prize speech. He said that he was lucky to get to work with the materials of the human spirit.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And he said that those are love and honor and pity and pride and compassion and sacrifice. And so this idea that there are things that are the materials of the human spirit which can animate a company or may not. And it reminds me of another thing. A friend of mine recently said that he couldn't get an innovative idea through because he couldn't show the incremental value that the big idea was going to produce. And what my other friend said is, that's because your leadership lacks principles. And he didn't mean lacks integrity. He meant that they didn't have first principles from which they were working that would open to the door to something that was a categorical improvement as opposed to an incremental improvement.
Yeah. You don't need a company like SYP or a big existential leadership summit or offsite to make incremental improvements. You should be making those all the time. But in the moments when you're thinking about the future, even just your annual strategic planning, that's the time to go back to the first principles. Because, otherwise, what do you need a CEO for? There's lots of operators in a company that could make things a little bit better. In my mind, the job of a CEO is to be thinking in that sort of categorically different way, to be a few years out, to imagine new things for the company.
Does it take internal work for leaders? And I ask that in part, I get to communicate routinely with a very broad group of very intelligent, very educated people in a network that I'm a part of. But art and the materials of the human spirit are not actually on the tip of everybody's mind, because the truth is many of us haven't been immersed in that. So the question is, what is their internal work, and what is that internal work?
For the leaders, certainly. In most, if not all of our engagements, we are working at a few different levels. Sometimes the impact we're looking to make is at a societal or or even like a nation level. We do a lot of work in the UAE with the sort of national plans for education and culture and whatnot. So sometimes it's at the very big level. Almost always it's at the organizational level. What is this company doing? In order to drive that change, it's also the team, usually a leadership team that's either the C-suite or, if it's a CHRO, the people leadership team. But we also, almost without fail, do individual human work too. And sometimes that looks more formal than not. Sometimes it's more of one-on-ones with our main client to help them sort of sort through their thinking. But other times it happens just as a part of the process that they'll start to see things in new ways. That like leadership certainly is a strategic act, but it needs to come from a leader's principles, from their ethos, from something that feels very, very steady for people. And so a lot of times we do find that leaders along the path will find a new perspective on how perhaps at one point they always felt that performance was the only thing they were hired to do. And a lot of times through our work, we're also helping them see that humanity is the other side of performance, and that especially at this moment and post-COVID, that leading for humanity is just as important as leading for performance.
I want to get into that question of humanity. I had Don Norman come in and speak, who wrote Design of Everyday Things and a number of other books. His most recent book from MIT is Design for Humanity. And his point was essentially that we need to create a closed loop economy that is not pulling out of the environment and destroying it. It needs to be something that we need to start working toward that. And he felt it was a part of the role of designers to get to humanity-centered design. And so when you talk about humanity, do you mean inside the company? Do you mean outside the company? Do you mean both?
Yeah, both. It's funny to think that for a long time, and maybe it's still true, that companies were just designed to make money. Because, like, who's that money for? It's just us people here on Earth. Like, we're just making the best of the time that we have. And so it's all for us and our planet. And it's weird that we've sort of gotten away from that. Like, what? To make money, but to just destroy our planet? In the meantime, it's any aliens looking down on us would just be like smacking their forehead. Like, what are these people? It's just they've invented this notion called money and they're all after it. And in the meantime, they're not going to have any place to live. And nobody's happy and they hate working. And it just feels silly to me when you zoom out in that way. And so not to say that we certainly help our clients have successful, profitable businesses. That is full stop. But not at the expense of their people's livelihoods and days and lives, and not at the expense of the planet. And there will always be trade-offs. And I'm not the expert to speak on environmental policy, or that is for somebody else. But where we find success is making sure that the work that we do is holding that performance and the humanity in equal measure, and that they're feeding each other so that you have a high-performing business with great margins and revenue, how you measure that for yourself, so that you can reinvest in growth in your people and your impact. And your people, your employees, if they feel great about their work, they will invest in your performance. And your customers, if they feel taken care of, that they'll invest back. It should be a positive feedback loop, and where one doesn't have to come at the expense of the other. I think we're just relearning that as a society now, and we're happy to be able to help the world along its way.
So let's talk about the state of work. This is a show largely about the design of work. And so how are we doing at the design of work? Today, what are our attitudes toward it? And then we'll get into how that might improve.
I think it's highly varied. Some people have found a way to find balance and joy and impact. But on the whole, not that great. I've been thinking a lot about, to be a bit morbid for a second, my mother passed away in October. Since then, like it would for anyone, you think a lot about your own mortality and our time on this planet. And I've been reading a lot of Stoicism too, which has a real focus on remembering death. Not in a sad way, but in a way that our days are numbered. They're not forever. And every day that you spend at work is one of those days that you are spending. You're spending it. You got a day, you're using it for something. And I think about all of the sort of chatter around how we as a society, or at least where I live in New York, in American society, how we talk about work, where we say things like, oh, it's a Monday, or like, is it only Wednesday? Or, it's Friday, happy Friday. And, it's all in jest, it's a little bit playful, but it's more and more feels like how sad that so many people are wishing away their lives, that they are wishing away 5/7 of their lives until they retire, and that the work week is extractive and tiring and something to get through. And we say, oh, you got through the week, only to have your 2 days to fill yourself up again. And I just think it's, again, if I were an alien looking down on Earth, I'd say, what are these people like, they're here for a very short time. The least they should be doing is trying to enjoy themselves. And not to say that we should only have weekends and not work. In fact, I think there's a huge opportunity for people to work and for it to be all the things you'd want it to be: meaningful, joyful, social or not social, impactful, satisfying, all the things you talk about, Dart, in your like what work does for you. There's so much opportunity there. And yet I think we've sort of found ourselves in a cult of work that has everyone believing that just work sucks and so be it. It does for everybody.
I think for some of that, the root cause is essentially our business models, and that our business models frame people as an input to production. And because of that framing, it's all about how much can we get out of that input to production.
Right.
And somehow along the way, everybody has fallen into the belief system that that's just what work is. One of the most telling phrases to me is I often am talking to people about how to make work better. And they say, well, sometimes just work is bad. That's why it's called work. And so the word work has actually become synonymous with not good. And I don't know how we arrived here.
In the dictionary, how would one define work? I guess it's like an effortful action, if I had to make it up. Maybe you know better than I do. But yeah, why should that be bad? Like, you feel strong when you're exerting effort and satisfied with the action, if it's an action you wanted to take. And you can feel powerful and proud, especially if the action is for someone else, which I think all work should be. It's how we exchange our value. So what's bad about that at a fundamental level? I don't think anything. Sometimes it's hard, but even hard things are satisfying. And I wouldn't pretend that every minute of work would be joyful. You don't have to enjoy it all, but to define it as something bad, oh boy, we've lost our way.
I recently interviewed Dan Cable at the London Business School, and he talks about that there's a part of our brain that enjoys the pursuit, enjoys seeking. And there's a whole reward system around pursuit and seeking and exploring. And then there's a whole reward system around getting. But our management systems have assumed that the only reward is the getting, which is the pay or the reward or the something, and have ignored the part of our reward system that is about the pursuit and about the exploration. So how might we design work better?
Well, based on what you just shared, we need to design the pursuit better. It's nice to fall asleep at night and feel like, oh, I did this thing and it made a difference, and that is great. But also the human lived experience of 40 hours a week or, whatever it is for you, there's so much opportunity to make the journey better. And just roughly, if I were to put a framework against it, like all good consultants, there's one, it's the people. Like, how do you make the human social experience better? And so that's things like inclusion and belonging and psychological safety and camaraderie. And because the people that you spend, the humans that you spend time working with, has a hugely disproportionate impact on your experience at work. If you have one bad meeting or someone said something and made you, like, that can ruin your day, your week. It's those human experiences that really stick with us. And so how can we create teams and organizations that have cultures that are inviting, that allow you to flourish, that allow you to interact in the way that you want? So it's one. The second, I would say, like the process of the work itself. And so everything from meetings to the process of how you go about your work to where you work. Of course, the hot topic of the day of in office or somewhere else or 9 to 5 or when you feel inspired, and how we design going from idea to thing that we've delivered. I think could be so much better. Even Cal Newport writes a lot about this. He has a book called A World Without Email on how we've just become so busy in our, he calls it the hyperactive hive mind. Everyone's chit-chattering away, and there's just no deep time for deep, thoughtful, creative work. Or even not by yourself, creative social work with a team, just hours to throw ideas around. And so I could go on and on, but there's so much upside to be had there. And then the third thing being what is the output, the impact of the work that you're producing? And, and then here you can get into things more like climate action or, customer impact. In the hours that we have with the people who are around us, can we do more good in the time that we have? When we talked previously about purpose or vision, that's the question on leaders' minds, is where are we putting all of these people and all of this time? What are we putting that towards? And the good news is that there's huge headroom across those three different areas if we slowly but surely take the time to get there.
I want to go through some of the things on your list of things that make work great. And by the way, most work, most days should be fun.
Yes.
So that's one. And again, that's an example of your writing that I like a lot, which is not all work. Come on, let's get real. Most work, most days should be fun.
Yes.
This is number 2. It helps you to have a good time with your teammates, which you've covered. Quality work and thought is gold. Don't let busyness sabotage it. And you mentioned Cal Newport. Cal Newport, by the way, is very good at saying no to coming onto podcasts. And that's because he blocks out whole big chunks of time where he simply heads down. He's doing his own thing, right? And I totally respect that, but it's actually quite hard to get him on a podcast as a result.
Yeah.
At least at this moment. But quality work and thought is gold. What does that look like to you? Let's actually say to you, because it's probably going to be different for everybody. But let's talk about what's quality work.
Well, I can give you a specific example. In our project teams, we typically work 3 to 4 months on a project with a client. Usually, the entire span of those 3 months is sort of what you would imagine it. We have our stand-ups in the morning, we're on Slack, we're emailing back and forth, we have client meetings. As you heard me talk about, a lot of the work is very highly creative work. And we have creative directors, highly brilliant, unusual minds. And yet we have all those unusual minds. For the most part, we have the meetings, we have a brainstorm 90 minutes. But during the pandemic, it became even worse. It was just so efficiency-based because you get on a meeting for 30 minutes, you get off a meeting for 30 minutes. And it started to feel like we are just not getting the best out of our brains. And one of my colleagues, Sue Walsh, who's a principal of design at SYP, she said one day, we just can't be creative in 30 minutes. We just can't. Our brains don't work that way. And so on that project that we were working on, we said, okay, enough is enough. We blocked out an entire day that we called a do-nothing day. And the setup was that we told ourselves we have nothing to produce this day. No client deliverables. There's going to be no meetings, nothing. And so we went to Little Island, which is this little park in New York. We made these little paper conversation starters about our work. So it was about the client, about the project of what would be the most inspiring way we could open this experience. And so it was our opportunity to bat around the ideas, go down rabbit holes. So we just sat in this park, had some hot dogs or whatever was there for lunch and spent the entire day doing nothing but just letting our minds be free in the way that they were really more designed to do. And at the end of that day, we came up with an idea that ended up being the most highly rated experience of the entire, we were designing this week-long experience globally for an organization. And the highest rated component of that was what we came up with that one day. And so ever since then, in every project team, I set up from the beginning, you have to set it up, a do-nothing day so that we can let our brains breathe. Because that's the kind of quality work, quality thinking that is just so easily trampled upon by our Google calendars.
Yeah, there's a reasonable, I'm going to make up a theory right now.
Great.
The mind is somewhat of a congress, and intellectual thought is noisy, and the busyness thought is noisy. And you just have to clear that stuff out to let the aesthetic mind be heard sometimes, the artistic mind. And so I have a whole list of quotes from discoverers who said, I was just that moment stepping onto the train to go skiing when it came to me.
Yeah.
The solution to that mathematical proof was this, and it was because it was lurking in there. It was obscured by daily life, and that person had to break out of it. So you say, point number 4, process should work for humans. Humans don't work for process. What does that mean?
It means somewhere along the way, we just started to forget that we are the ones in charge. Like, we are making up work for ourselves. And so often I hear, especially when we're doing culture work with clients, like, oh, it's just the way we have to do it. We have to do these checkpoints. And, at every bit of process or red tape or checkpoint, it was patching some hole of something that went wrong. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of process that's very protective of organizations and helps streamline things. But sometimes it gets to the point where like, oh, this is just sort of how we go about the thing. That just doesn't work anymore. And I think we forget to take a beat and say, is this working? Is this helping us or not? Because it's just for us. And so I'm a big fan of team retros, just like taking a moment in some interval, once a month at least, to say, okay, what's working about how we're working together, what's not, what's slowing us down, what's speeding us up, and just having a moment to, you spoke about first principles, to go back to first principles of, okay, what are we trying to achieve? Is this the best way for us to do it? And if it's not, let's stop doing it that way. Like, why do we do stand downs every day? We don't really get anything done. And my husband works for a Shopify who famously swept the entire organization's calendars of meetings, like 5 people and above, something like that. And said if they were important meetings, then put them back if you like. And cleared some crazy number of minutes of meetings, across the company. And I was such a fan of it. For the record, he likes it too. But it's just a way to say, like, let's be intentional about how we're spending our time. That inertia sometimes can be a really, really bad thing for the way we work.
Let's look at number 5. Demand to be yourself. Demand that others get to be themselves.
Yes. The caveat I'll make before this one is that I don't believe everyone has to bare their soul at work. For the people who want to show up and do the thing that they were hired to do and go home or log off, I think that's fine. I am a big fan of however work works best for you, then that's great. It doesn't have to be one way. That said, on the whole, I find that more often than not, people have a desire to be more of their true, authentic selves and share more of themselves at work than is deemed appropriate. And that is long legacy of suits and conference rooms and needing to be and look professional and say the right words, like leverage and impact. You sort of put on your business mask. And actually, I was recently meeting with a client and my colleague was like, all right, we were traveling. She's like, let's go put on our costumes. And if it were up to me, like I'm in now, I'm in my like stretchy pants and like sort of sweatshirt top. If it were up to me, I'd just wear this all the time. But, to be professional, we live in the real world. So we put on proper clothes to go see a client. But all of those things, while they have their function, they signal a professionalism, a seriousness of intent. The flip side is that they can feel so uninclusive, conformity driving, and just like uncomfortable. And so one thing that we do on every team that I lead is we call it a finger shoot every morning. So and during our stand-up, we say, how is everybody doing on a scale from 1 to 5, 1, 2, 3? And then you put out your hands for like a 1, a 5. You could be a fist if you're like a true 0 that day. And we just run around the room and everyone says why. And sometimes people are like, I'm a 3, all good. Perfectly fine answer. But I always try to model, like I say exactly how I am because I want to give permission for other people to do the same. And so the other day I said, so I'm the caregiver for my dad. He has a cat who's very old. I think it's like, I was at the vet. I think the cat, we have to put her down. It was like pretty crappy morning. I was a true 1. And that is so not work relevant, but it was what was happening in my life at the time. Or other times I say, it's my birthday this weekend and like whatever, the good, the bad, anything in between. What I found is it gives other people permission to do the same and creates like a very lovely, cozy team. And again, not this in no way to make people divulge what's going on in their lives. But I think so many people are yearning to show up as a human, to not put on their business mask every day or their costume. And so in every situation, I do demand to be myself. I don't want to hide. I did put on the nicer pants, I guess. But, aside from that, and if I am in a situation where I feel like people have to hide themselves to be successful, I do my best to speak up for them and to create the conditions where they don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, there's this funny wall that we put up between life and work. And I'm just a little bit desperate to tear it down. I worked for Cisco Systems for a long time, and we went virtual a decade ago. Virtual and completely international. When I had my team get together, we moved into my house. So when we had an offsite, everybody moved in.
Amazing.
People brought their babies, their nannies, their husbands, their wives, until all the rooms were full, and then we got hotels. But we just moved in, and we cooked together, we worked together. And there was an exercise that we did before those meetings, which was when we arrived, because we were getting work done. And the exercise was called unpacking. And the unpacking exercise was, what are you bringing with you from home or work that might interfere with your ability to think freely during this meeting? And the first time around, the first big meeting we did like that, and we did the unpacking exercise, it was sort of tactical stuff. I introduced issues I was having with my father. But 3 times in, the third time around, actually, literally my hair on the back of my neck stands up when I think about some of the things that we talked about. Serious stuff. And then we talked about things that we might do to help people think freely during that time. That team, to this day, is one of the closest teams existing because of that depth.
Yeah. Oh, I believe that 1,000%.
And what else would we want to come to work for? There's other things, but certainly that's one of them.
Yeah. It's the people you spend your days with. And I have a memory of a team, just like to think I have lots of cozy teams. But there's one in particular that, we worked together at the very start of the pandemic. We sort of went through all of that together. It's now most of that team actually has gone off to other things, isn't at SYP anymore, but we still keep in touch. We have our little, text thread and check in on each other and catch up. And, I'm just in love with that team and those humans. And I don't even use the word love facetiously. It was just such a beautiful group of people. And we did great work too. Those are the things that stick with you when you think about the end of your career and looking back and the highs and lows of work. Gosh, it sounds cliched, but it's it's the people. But that's honestly the truth. That's why I work at SYP.
Well, and I will add that there's some people, when I just tell that story about coming to the house, people recoil in horror, which is the last thing I would want to do is move in with my coworkers, the absolute last thing.
Yeah, I know. I hear that. Hence my preface on this one, because some people don't want to do that. Some people want to save all of that intimacy and connection for their friends and family. And that's fine. I think that's totally fine, which is why if we do the finger shoot and someone's like, I'm a 3, that's great. That's it. It's just that historically, we've really erred toward not treating each other as humans with lives. And so for all of the people for whom that is enlivening and fulfilling and meaningful, I think it's great that it's ever more possible.
Yeah. And interestingly, the company eventually said, you can't do that, by the way.
Oh, the HR team came and got you?
I am the HR team.
Oh, that's true.
And nonetheless, yes.
Oh, maybe the lawyers or, I don't know, risk mitigation.
No, it was kind of none of those things. It was, that's not the done thing. And it was partially because of legal risk. It was also just not the done thing to be like that.
Yeah.
Let me pick another one. The time it takes you to talk about a thing, you could have started it.
Yeah. This is just a personal pet peeve. Companies are so slow. I'm one end of the spectrum on this. Before I was at SYP, I was the CEO of NOBL, which was a much smaller consultancy. And so we also worked with a lot of startups too. So I just have I think anyone coming more from the startup-y world has a bit of that ethos of well, go after it. You got to test it, get it out there, right? Say it, try it, because that's how startups survive. And so I've always just carried that with me. And now working with very large organizations, and, I get it. Like, this is the work that I do too. It's complex. There's so many stakeholders. You want people to feel included. So many have a consensus-driven culture. But a lot of times, the risk for just trying a thing is actually relatively low. We just get it all stuck in our heads, like, oh, I have to check with that person, and that person wants to check with that person. It's all very, sort of CYA, cover your ass, and like before we do anything new. And, not only is it bad for business because other companies with a little bit more appetite for just like getting started instead of talking about it and belaboring it, like they'll grab the market. But also, it's just way more fun to have a culture of experimentation that instead of having an idea that you make 10 decks about and 10 meetings about and try and work it into a strategic plan for all of next year, if instead you could just like get started on it. And this doesn't even need to be like a huge thing. The bigger the thing, probably the more consideration. But if it's even, like some way of doing something differently in your team or trying out a new program, you just got to give it a go.
Right. Trial and error works great, as long as you pay attention to the outcome to see if it's an error.
Yeah.
It's frequently the very fastest way to do something is just to try it. So this is kind of an unquestion, which is because it's about what companies could not do. What could companies just not do anymore that would make this possible?
Yeah. Okay. Quick answer is I think lots you could remove. And I'll try and think of some more specific examples. One of them, like the Shopify removing meetings. It's like, let's take it away and see what breaks. Lots of things come to mind in terms of process. So I'm feeling like our ops team or like CEO is going to kill me. But consulting is very common to track your time. Well, some actually like bill hourly, but others just use it for like metrics of knowing like team health and profitability and things like that. Sometimes I think like it's a lot of time for people to go in and do that and like figure out where their time is going if we stop doing that, would we miss not having the results? And again, like I'm sure there are lots of people in like consulting operations that are like, yes, we would miss we need to know the things. But I guess I use it as an example because there's lots of things that I think if we just tried without it for a bit, maybe nothing bad would happen and we'd save a lot of time.
And Netflix threw out vacation time, essentially. You didn't have to log vacation time.
Yeah.
So it's just now, apparently that results in everybody just never taking vacations. I mean, I'm not sure that's true. I don't have good data on that. I have heard secondhand that means people don't take vacations, which is not really the outcome we're after. But
yeah. On that point, I do think it really depends on the culture. SYP doesn't track vacation time. And my sense is like people take a good amount of vacation. Like I know I do. And I sense other people, and we have like 2 weeks off over the holidays. And but that's because the culture is one that's just like laden with humanity. Like that's the business that we're in. But again, other times people really crave like, what am I allowed? And crave to know like, what have I, like a company, what have I sold you? Hopefully I haven't sold you all of my time, which is a little bit of the model when you say like you request time off, like as if you sold them, you swore over your life and you're asking for a little bit of it back. And so I also get the other side of it where like just being super clear about like, I have sold you this many days or weeks and the rest I have not sold you. Those are mine. And so, I get that point too. I did like the intention of the, not tracking time off, which is the intention being what happens if we just trust each other being the company and employees. Like I trust you to want to make the company better. And then the company trusts, or the employees trust the company to pay them, provide for them, and they'll do what they have to do. And fundamentally, I think that's a really nice thing.
Yeah, I'm ready to throw out location. I don't think location is very important. I'm ready to throw out performance management, which Cisco Systems actually did. And it was not a disaster. It was just fine. And other companies have done.
Yeah.
And now I do know one person who, when that happened, just felt like they weren't seen anymore. And so there's still a need to be seen. And there's got to be a better way than performance management.
Yeah. Because feeling seen, like that's a good design challenge that can be solved lots of ways. That's through regular one-on-ones, through feedback, through just like plain old attention, like having people care about you, check in on you. Or, if you need it, you can ask for specific feedback. But I agree, like the theme throughout all of these things are what are the ways that we've tried to turn a human being's livelihood into measurable, quantifiable little nuggets that we track and measure. And so everything, the time off, the hours, the where are you, when are you working, how good are you working, all those ways that we try and quantify humans, I think we could do without. Because what's the value of one brilliant idea that somebody had in 5 minutes? You don't capture that by oh, well, they were not in the office and working. It just doesn't. That's what you want. You got to stop measuring the stuff that actually isn't that important.
I want to go back to the topic of leadership. What is liminal leadership? And I happen to have a list here. But
yeah.
What does that mean? It's something that SYP has talked about.
Yes.
What is it?
So liminal, I actually, embarrassingly enough, had to learn what that meant when we put out our bit on liminal leadership. I was like, okay, I think I know. Let me Google it just in case. Anyway, it means the in-between space, the neither here nor there, the sort of limbo purgatory, although it maybe has a nicer connotation than that. It's the in-between. So we do have a list of what does that mean. I would just define it as leadership now is just no longer a straight line like it used to be. And what I mean by that is it used to be far more possible to every October get together your leadership team, put together a strategic plan, you figure out the path that you're going to take, the initiatives that you're going to launch, the budget that you're going to do. You set all of your people against those. And then for the next year, you push and maybe tweak, and you generally, chart your course ahead. But now it's just so much more complex than that. Everything from world geopolitics and the environment and social justice and how your market's changing and how your customers are changing and how what your employees need is changing. And so leaders are constantly having to adapt. Sometimes we use the analogy or the metaphor of leaders need a compass much more than they need a map. A map tells you go straight, turn right, 2 blocks down and you're there. But a compass tells you more or less, are we heading in the direction of where we want to be, of our vision and our aspirations. And along that journey, leaders have to hold multiple truths at the same time. And the leaders that do that well are the ones that we would consider these really courageous liminal leaders. So holding the truth that, we want our people to have flexibility and have the time and space that they need. And we want people to be able to come together. So how do I hold both of those things and make those both true? That's a hot topic for return to the office or not. Or, a lot of times we talk a lot about empathy and aspiration in our work with leaders, holding a lot of empathy for how hard it is to be a leader, while also holding the aspiration of what that leader wants to achieve. And it's the caring for and the pushing at the same time. And any CEO or any leader of an organization needs to hold the same thing for their people too, that there's aspiration for what the team can produce, but also empathy for when it's hard or what it feels like to fail along the way. It's just the holding of multiple truths in equal balance, understanding both sides of those, understanding, multi-stakeholder capitalism is hot buzzword of the day, but it just means we need to consider lots of different perspectives, whereas it used to be you consider one perspective, which is stakeholders, and you use your strategic plan to get more for your stakeholders and go. And that's just not the world anymore.
Someone else who's been on the show, Shalini Verma, has spoken about, well, to me anyway, about how the job of leadership is impossible. In other words, it's impossible to make it a purely intellectual act. It has too much paradox in it. And the system that you're looking at is so big and complex that you have to use a degree of intuition. And that then becomes a capability. I want to talk about some of the things that are described by SYP about liminal leadership, because each one is what I'm going to say is they're not the sorts of things you often talk about in business. So one of them is the death of certainty, which is so many fundamental things we took for granted have been destabilized.
Yeah.
Some of that sounds like COVID, but I think it was going on before that.
Oh, yeah.
Universal grief, which is pain at seeing what is out of place in the world, grief of others, and opportunity to grow beyond it. What's interesting about those first two is that they are dark. Really
Yeah,
dark.
I know. It can get a little depressing.
But just wait for it. Inner work for outer work. Leadership is not a hierarchical act. It's an act of caring and accompaniment, which I think is got to be a stretch for a lot of organizations.
Yeah.
And this one, actually, I need to track down the origin of this one because, in fact, I already put this person on my list of people I need to interview. The person who said that liminal leadership requires moral imagination. A leader's first question must be why? What are the aspects of leadership that are replicating the harms of the past? So, by the way, this is not a show about me reading your own material. Back to you.
Oh, you read it very well.
But each of these is so good that we could do a show on them. There's a few more, which since I'm at the end, I'll just keep going, which is collective creativity, which is collective leadership. And you talked about one of the things that SYP talks about is creating partnerships, not just inside companies, but between companies, working together collectively. And then the last one is composting, which I love the idea, which is, maybe you can say what that idea is because I'm still working on it. What does that mean in terms of liminal leadership?
There is a beautiful piece of poetry that I don't want to butcher here, and so I can send later. I think the concept of composting is that you create something new, but not by throwing away the past, by turning it into something more beautiful. So in one version, you throw out the apple peels of things that you've done before, things that you've tried, ways of being. But all along, if you have been trying and doing your best to show up as the leader that you want to be, the things that your company tries, the things that you try, you don't have to throw them away in a way that dishonors your past. You can take what you've learned and use it to feed and nourish your future. It all sounds a bit heady. A lot of my background is in organizational change. That's what my master's degree is in. And a lot of my earlier consulting work was on organizational change. And I always did a lot of work about you don't disparage the past or throw it out. Sometimes you do. Sometimes horrible things happen in the past. But rather, for an organization, whatever route you've taken to get here, sometimes you just have to tell your people, I know we're going in this new direction, we're trying this new thing, but all of the work that got us to today is what got us to today. And so thank you for that. And therefore, in this next chapter, we're using what we've learned to now launch into our new vision, our new purpose or whatever that may be. And so it fits within liminal leadership because it's holding two truths. It's holding the truth of we honor what got us to today and we look towards the future. You don't have to throw away what got you to today.
It's interesting. I can actually think of a very practical example of this, which is a company tries to go into a particular line of business. It's a new line of business, is not successful. And then they shut it down. So then there's a residual trauma in the organization.
Oh, that didn't work.
That didn't work. We're not the kind of company that can do that kind of thing. And so what you've done is you've actually shut down your range of options because as an organization, you're still healing from something you hate, which is interesting because companies need to take a risk and they need to be good about it when it doesn't work out, right? But we're not. And that's because the risk we took, we get so committed to, some part of the company gets so committed to that work. And for them, it's the end of, 5 years of something they really cared about. And so some way of changing direction without creating scar tissue.
My favorite example of this is Ben & Jerry's has a graveyard, both physical and digital, for flavors that didn't work out, which is just so awesome because it's nobody loved bubblegum peanut butter. Well, we gave it our best go. And that was somebody's life for a little while. They were VP of bubblegum peanut butter. They tried it, they invested in it. It was a journey. And now they learned that nobody's into that. And so you give it a little piece of honor in the graveyard. And it's, it's playful and lovely and respects all the time and humanness that went into that.
I'll tell you, interesting. Recently, Google solved protein folding, essentially. This is something that people had been on a journey on for decades trying to solve how proteins fold. DeepMind got into the business, solved it for all intents and purposes. One of the things that somebody complained about was, you know what I regret? Is all the blind alleys we didn't go down. We would have learned a lot just by feeling our way in the dark to get to that solution. And I thought to myself, yeah, okay, I'd rather have the solution. But it was an interesting point, which is this idea of the path of learning that you get by not just jumping to the right solution.
Yeah. Like maybe they would have solved five other things. I don't know. But good job, DeepMind.
I know, it's pretty great. I mean, in terms of drug discovery, it's unbelievable. I mean, the things that we're going to be able to do with that are just unbelievable. So thanks. I'll take the drug discovery.
Yeah.
So I ask this question of everybody at the end of every show, which is, what job do you hire your job to do for you?
I love this question of yours. So I'm just at a unique point in my career, personally, in that if you had asked me this maybe like 5 years ago, I was like all in my career and ambitious and climb the ranks and make the impact. And I would have said something more along the lines of like, I hire my job to be a platform, an accelerant. Now, I mentioned my mom passing me. I'm a caregiver for my dad. I'm actually only 50% at SYP. A beautiful thing about SYP is like, because we lead with so much humanity, myself and 2 other partners are on this sort of 50% model, which allows me to have my caregiving responsibilities and also at SYP. And so in this moment where I'm in the sandwich generation, as they say, I have an 8-year-old daughter as well, my relationship to work, the value is much more day to day. I think much less now about like what ladders I'm going to climb and just, did I have a good day at work? And what that brings me to is if the good days that I have at work, like I say, most days should be fun, are days where I get to spend a good amount of time with my colleagues, either in person or on Zoom. Because at this moment, I said this within SYP too, this rather extreme thing that even if SYP said, we're going to quit consulting, we are just going to be a pen manufacturer, we're going to make pens all day long, I would say, great. Who's the team? Sign me up. And that is because right now I feel so inspired by the people that I'm just these humans that I work with every day are so beyond brilliant, capable, warm, lovely. I just can't get enough of my colleagues at SYP. I just want to spend time with them and learn from them and just it's a bonus that we get to make all this amazing impact in the world and we get to make money to feed ourselves and our family. Like, that's all icing. And so right now, I hire my job to create the conditions where people I like to work with are my teammates. Like, it's almost in 100% our talent team. Like, somehow SYP attracts people who are just so creative and kind and brilliant and smart. And I feel humbled every day. And it's just super cool. It's like the fact that SYP takes care of all these other people I want to be around. That's what I want. And it'll change. My relationship to work is unique in this moment. It won't be like this forever. But right now, I just have so many good days. So that's what I'm thankful for.
And you really captured a couple of things in there. One is what we want from this product work is situational. It changes. It's not an attribute of us. I mean, it's partially an attribute of us, but it's also something that it's in response to our situation. What do you pay to buy that experience? And, what does it cost you? And I'm making a distinction there because what you pay is what you give SYP and their clients to receive this. But then what does it cost you might go beyond that.
I guess in a literal sense, I pay my time. I'm given however much time I'm given on this planet. Hopefully it's a lot. And I am handing over some of that time to work on behalf of SYP and SYP's goals. Maybe that's my most literal sense. I pay hours. What it costs me, gosh, I don't know if I feel too rosy about this at the moment, I think a lot about, we started the conversation talking about how for too many people, work is broken and extractive. But to me, like work, like it really fills me up. I don't feel like there's a huge cost because at 50%, which comes with 50% of the pay. So I guess there is a little bit of cost there. So I'm buying back some of my time. I still get to take my daughter to swimming. I still get to see my dad most days. I kind of try and exercise when I feel up for it, but I have time for it should I feel inspired. And mostly it gives to me. And so what an awesome thing. I get camaraderie and pride and joy, and they pay me. It's pretty great. I don't know if I'll feel like this forever, and I certainly haven't always felt like this in the past, but I'm really very, very happy at work. And so I don't know, what does it cost me? Not a lot. Gives a lot to me.
That is fantastic. Last question, 2 more questions actually. What medium do you work in?
Maybe like we opened with, hearts and minds.
I like that. The materials of the human spirit.
Yes, materials of the human spirit. We get together and we say, how are we going to make people so jazzed and awesome about, feel great about this vision that they get to contribute to, that'll be part of their life's legacy and work's legacy. So we work with, how do we make people feel blank?
How can people learn more about you, your work? Where would they go?
They would have gone to my website, which was br.ee, which was this super romantic URL present from my husband from my birthday. It's an Estonian suffix. But then this Estonian businessman went and took it, and we didn't realize it was expiring. And it was a whole deal and this beautiful romantic gift of a URL. Anyway, longer story than you wanted. My personal website will be back up and running at breegroff.com in the next month or so. In the meantime, SYP or SYPartners, you can find us at SYPartners.com. And you can always find me on LinkedIn. I write a few things there as well. And always happy to have a chat with other folks interested in the same things.
That is great. That's Bree with 2 E's and Groff with 2 F's. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was such fun.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.